talking quickly about that, the aquaculture farming of this region. Water is such a key factor within the Mexica and the Aztec world in this area in particular. This is a famous painting by Diego Rivera showing the kind of evolution and high-level technology that was happening within the water farming systems in the lakes of Tenochtitlan and within the Mexican Mexica Valley. Now, this is a beautiful depiction because it's actually highly accurate of an aquaculture farming system known as the Chinampas. Now, the Chinampas was an agricultural technique that was composed of basically woven reeds. And in this picture, you can see these men making this kind of woven mat of stakes with reeds that are kind of crossed, and then it's a mesh. And what they do within these squares is they'll pile soil, and they'll also take some like lovely silt from the banks and they'll mix it in and kind of make a compost bed. At times they would even take fish and use that as fertilizer and inject that into the beds and pile those up, and they would plant on top of these. And so you can see in this picture behind, there's trees planted, even buildings planted on top. Now, what's amazing about these is that the United Nations designated the Chinampas as a globally important agricultural heritage system. And it was so advanced because they used the wetlands and lakes as the irrigation system. So this is flood irrigation. And these floating gardens would over time become stabilized via the roots and the addition, because they kept taking care of these generationally to the size and scale of massive cities. And here's a cross section of the Chinampa as well, how it's being built. And you can see the early stage on the left. There's a gap between the sediment boundary of the lake bottom, which over time gets filled on the far right picture and becomes stabilized via the roots and just the addition of mud, manure, and sediment. And these woven reeds are kind of holding it all together. But what happens is through the planting of trees on these edges, the roots become the new kind of net that holds it all together. These floating gardens, as they're called, is a highly advanced agricultural system. And today, they still exist. And this is a famous area in just a little bit south of Tenochtitlan called Xochimilco. This is the Chinampas today. And this is an example of the evaporative cooling that is also happening within the system. And Nat had the opportunity of visiting Xochimilco. Is that correct, Nat?
Hi, yes. I was lucky enough to actually film there as part of an upcoming series we're doing on low tech. And what I found amazing is that they originally began as burial grounds. So they would the Xochimilcans, who were the pre-Aztecs who inhabited the area, used to also bury their dead there or sink their dead into this lake. And the reason why it's so fertile is because it's surrounded by a series of volcanoes. And so even before humans moved into those lands, the lake bed was collecting nutritious minerals from these volcanoes for millions and millions of years. And so when the Xochimilcans brilliantly decided to create this amazing form of agriculture on what was not considered good agricultural land, it was literally like this, what would have been seen as just a lake or swampland, they were able to actually turn it into what was the region's only 12-month a year fertile lands. So they're able to cultivate it the whole year round, as opposed to other agricultural systems that needed time to be fallow. This gave food all year round. And then when the Aztecs arrived, I learned that part of the Aztec origin myth was that they had been given, I think it was an eagle or a hawk, but there was they were told to build their city where this bird landed. And so it landed in this lake. And so the Aztecs came and they built on what the Xochimilcans had already created and expanded these quote unquote floating agricultural beds to be able to provide food for the entire Aztec empire. So when Hernan Cortes arrived in Mexico, and he was asked to be taken to the capital, Tenochtitlan, he was taken to a city that was floating or looked as if it was floating in the middle of these gardens, of these agricultural beds. It would have looked spectacular. There's a lot of you can look up on YouTube if you look up 3D imagery of Tenochtitlan to see what Hernan Cortes would have seen. And so sadly, as a lot of our history goes, after the colonization, a lot of this information and a lot of these agricultural lands were lost. In fact, Xochimilco is the size of oh my goodness, what's the name of the famous park in New York? You know, sorry, I've been living in the Amazon too long. Central Park. Yeah. Is it Central Park? Yeah. It's the size of Central Park. But it used to be the whole of Mexico City. So all of Mexico City is built on this lake. And that's why it's so dangerous when earthquakes come, because it's not built on solid ground. So that, yeah, that's the questionable wisdom of the Spanish. They were like, what's going on with these floating gardens? We should just fill these in with dirt and concrete and put some buildings on there. They didn't see the value of what they were destroying. But Xochimilco is still beautifully preserved. And if anyone wants to visit, there's a wonderful group called Arrvied, I'll put it in the chat, who provides sunrise tours of the canals, and then they're also rescuing not just the traditional farming systems, but the traditional foods. Oh, there it is. So beautiful. The traditional indigenous foods to that specific region, and you're treated to a beautiful breakfast as well. I highly recommend it. I'll put it in the chat, Arrvied. Thanks, Timo.
Thank you so much, Nat. Oh, so fascinating to think about how these, let's say, anthropogenic kind of systems have altered the environment. I mean, the region is dry and hot, but going through this, it's wet and moist, and you have this canopy of trees, and you're converting your system into these people in canoes and boats, harvesting and moving from place to place. It's incredible to think about the level of advanced technology that we can completely terraform environments to create something like this. And thank you so much for your share, Nat. It's fascinating. It's one of my dreams to go visit. So the next time you go, invite me, okay? Here is a picture that we can see of the depiction of just how vast and successful this system was. I mean, look at the number of people and gardens that this could inhabit. And on the left, you'll see a picture from what Nat was talking about. Look how small Xochimilco is. And then there's a little one also on Lake Chalco. But the Chinampas are the kind of dotted structures. It's a very small area that's left now from something that was so much larger. The next step we're going to take in this kind of combination of water, forestry, and indigenous cultures is back to the Maya. And within the Mayan agriculture, we have this system called the Milpa. Now, the Milpa cycle is fascinating to me because it's a 20-year cycle. And a lot of people have heard of the term Milpa. They think of corn, beans, and squash, which is known as the Three Sisters Guild. And so often the term is synonymous with the Three Sisters Guild, but the Milpa cycle is actually something larger. The Three Sisters Guild is a guild of plants that work in harmony with one another. So you have corn, beans, and squash. And how that would be planted would be you plant the corn and wait till it's about 6 inches tall. Then you interplant beans, and the beans will scale up the corn, and you have the squash that acts as a ground cover. And how these work together in harmony is that the beans provide nitrogen for the corn, and the corn provides a ladder for the beans to climb up, but then you have the squash that acts as a ground cover for everybody. And so this is what they call a plant guild. And a guild of plants is a synthesis of plants that work in harmony, in symbiosis with one another. So the Milpa system includes this knowledge, and it's something that's used all over California, Mesoamerica, South America, corn, beans, and squash. However, the Milpa cycle is a much larger cycle, and it's a 4-stage, 20-year cycle that goes from taking a closed forest to then turning that into a field, then turning that into crops, then turning that into a forest garden, and then turning that right back to the forest that it started off as. Now, this is one of the probably most advanced agricultural systems in human history because it's a polyculture of cultivation. It's a 20-year cycle, but it also will bring it back to the stage that it was at from the beginning without any nutrient loss or any sign that something had happened there. And this is how the Amazonian rainforest was engineered. This is massive scale. And this also includes the Belizean rainforest. And so just to take you through the steps, you take this in the picture on the right, you take an old growth forest and then you'll raise it, and you'll put it to the ground and burn a lot of it. You'll take some of the wood, use that for construction. But the fire would help prepare the soil. You get a lot of nutrient, a lot of fertilizer. And then you would plant things like the three sisters, corns, beans, squash. Then you would start to introduce other species, anywhere from 70 to 90 species. In addition to that, tomatoes, peppers, et cetera, et cetera. Then you will start to plant fruit trees, avocados, guavas, et cetera, et cetera. And then you'll start to plant hardwoods again. And so by the end of the cycle, the hardwoods will have overtaken and it will look just as it did from the start. And then you can actually raise it and do it again. What's beautiful about this system is that it's a 20-year cycle. And so imagine embarking on something that takes 20 years from beginning to end. This becomes not just a journey of planting a garden, but this becomes a life journey. This becomes your own growth as well. And so there's a famous quote by Matsunobu Fukuoka, who wrote this book called One Straw Revolution. And it's a fascinating book, and it's a book I would highly recommend. His quote is, the purpose of gardening is not the growing of crops, but the perfection and cultivation of human beings. And so this is the true purpose of gardening. And we see it active in the Milpa system. Because imagine in your lifetime, you would only be able to do a few of these cycles before you pass away and pass on the cycle to your children. And they will take it on and finish it and start a new one and then pass it on to their children. So this cycle is also multi-generational, passing of hands, but it becomes socio-cultural. And so, as I mentioned, this is some of the trees that you'll see in this, and within this, there's the ceiba trees. And so the forest to fields process, the first stage is about 4 to 5 years, second field to orchard, 4 to 12. And then we move from the orchard to the forest garden, which is 12 to 20. And then from then on, it becomes just full-on forest again. And what would be beautiful is that at the end of this is returned back to how it started. But you would have such a massive population of people living off of these various milpas that you would have almost a mosaic of milpas at different stages of development. So you're actually increasing not just surface area, but successional stages. So you could be trading with each other. Let's say you're at stage 12 years and you have a bunch of fruit and they're in the initial stages and they have annuals. You guys can actually trade. And so you have a high level of nutrient within this system, 90 plus species. And how functional was this? It's that the phrase is that this supported some of the largest human group populations in the Americas at the time, over millions of people. The word milpa comes from the Nahuatl, which means a field, or actually more properly to go towards a field. And the last thing I'm going to read to you is this quote from Charles Mann in his book 1491, which is also a book I would highly recommend you all. And it's probably one of the most, I'd say, up-to-date and researched books on the pre-Columbian Americas. And he says, the concept of the milpa is a socio-cultural construct rather than simply a system of agriculture. It involves complex interactions and relationships between farmers, as well as distinct personal relationships with both the crops and the land. For example, it's been noted that the making of the milpa is the central, most sacred act, one which binds together the family, the community, the universe. It forms the core institution of Indian society in Mesoamerica, and its religious and social importance often appear to exceed its nutritional and economic importance. So this takes us back to what we've been discussing this whole course, where the journey, the process is the ritual, and the yield is bonus. The daily acts are how you define yourselves. And within these indigenous cultures, we see that agriculture, spirituality, and myth are so interwoven that it is how they identify themselves as a people. And these daily acts are rituals. And this is a beautiful quote. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now.